The City of Grand Forks Special Council meeting, home of the proud University of North Dakota. Special meeting Monday, April 13th, 2020 is hereby called to order. Welcome and roll call.
Michael?
Here.
Dockler?
Here.
Weber?
Here.
Mock?
Here.
Marshall?
Here.
Sandy?
Here.
Dean? Dean, can I have you on mute just so we have it on the record?
I'm here.
All right, thank you, Ken. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Under 1.2, Mayor's announcements. The Red River crested at 47.6 feet. So I want to thank Engineering, Public Works, and Waterworks for all of their help during this flood fight. We'll continue to monitor as the situations change. Under COVID-19, stay home, slow the spread, stay well. I want to thank all TUN public health community for their assistance during this pandemic. We must stay the course. And we need to support our local businesses. Please support them any way you can with takeout, curbside, etc. Please complete your 2020 census at 2020census.gov because every person counts, so we need to count everybody. With that, item 2, awards, presentations, appointments, proclamations. 2.1.
Flood update?
Mr. Grasser.
Good evening, Mayor Brown, members of City Council. I'm happy to report on our flood update that we have crested and we are on the way down. As you reported, the crest was about 47.6. That happened last Friday.
Really?
Currently, we're at about 44.8, which for Grand Forks is a pretty good rate of fall. Again, for us, the Weather Service took out that long protracted crest that they were talking about earlier. So we've got a strong direction downward in elevation. And according to the latest Weather Service projections, we should be at about 39 feet by a week from now. And of course, they'll update those things daily. Relative to some of the flood fighting activities, we're now going to start taking things down that we had originally put up. The crew should have been out there today to take down the Lincoln flood walls. That was the last one to go up, partially up, and is going to be the first one to come down. The plan at this point in time is to reopen the Point Bridge sometime on Wednesday. The stop logs will come down, the bridge will get inspected, and right now it looks like all parties are in pretty good agreement that should happen on or about sometime during the day Wednesday. The Sorley Bridge is a little bit more tricky in that they have to coordinate between the two different DOTs, Minnesota and North Dakota. It's harder to inspect that bridge because the beams are right on the right near the water, as opposed to the Point Bridge, which goes quite high up and over. But looking at the rate of fall, we're planning on having inspections, bridge inspections go on there probably about Thursday. So depending upon what they find, we're hoping that we can get the bridge open towards the end of the week. That is basically my report, Mayor. Up for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Grasser? No, I don't see any. So thank you, Mr. Grasser.
Thank you.
Next item 2.2.
COVID-19 update.
Swanson. There you go.
Thank you, Mayor Brown and members of the City Council. I'm Debbie Swanson with the Grand Forks Public Health Department, and I do have a brief presentation for you. So I will allow the Public Information Center to load that up so that you can see it. I did also send all of you a copy of this presentation so you can use it, refer to it. It will be shorter than previous ones. You can go to the next slide, please. I think we lost our presentation. There we go. Here you can see just a really shorter summary today of the global cases, which is at about 1.8 million, almost 1.9 million, with global deaths of 118,304. The US cases surpassed the 500,000 mark now with 21,662 deaths. As a point of reference, we typically see somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30,000 deaths a year with typical seasonal influenza. That fluctuates quite a bit, but that's an average, and that's over several months. So this compressed time frame does certainly point towards a picture that is one of greater urgency. Next slide, please. This is the statewide coronavirus overview today. There were 23 daily positive test results, and a total daily tests completed was 431. So that number's down a little bit, but probably related to weekend traffic not being as high. You can see the map there that shows the preponderance of positive cases across the state and what counties they appear in. And Grand Forks County is in the 5 to 20 cases with our 11 cases. The total positive to date is 331 with 10,781 total tests that have been performed on North Dakota residents. And sadly, we are at 8 deaths for our state right now. A total of 40 people have required hospitalization, but only 13 of them are currently hospitalized. And the number recovered there of 127 includes some people who have been discharged from hospitals as well as other people who are considered recovered under the definition. You can go to the next slide, please. This is the North Dakota testing by county highlights, and you can see that Cass County and Burleigh County have had a much larger number of tests completed, and Burleigh County has 51, Cass County has 116. And then it drops down from there. Another county that's not on this slide that's having a significant number for their population is Montreal County. But there you can see Grand Forks, we've had 879 tests that have been completed with 11 positive test results. Next slide, please. This is the source of exposure. Now this is statewide. So the close contact is increasing at 72, but a really significant number is that community spread. And this includes people who are asymptomatic and sought testing or were tested as a result of a close contact or, were tested as a result of surveillance testing and were found to be positive. And then household contact and possible travel drop off from there, but travel really is a very much lower number right now. And then under investigation remains at 14. So we're able to classify people to a large extent. The next one is an important slide. As I've mentioned before, it shows the cases by age. Of concern is that 30 to 39 age range with 74 total cases there. Then there's some smaller green bars that are off to the right in the 50 to 59, 60 to 69, 70 to 79, and 80 plus, which indicates the deaths. So clearly this is a disease that is affecting people 50 and older and those with underlying health conditions, which are the most common in that age group of 50 and older. Next slide, please. This is hospitalizations by age, and I do believe this was a slide that was of interest to this group previously, and the State Health Department has decided to publish this information now that they have a little bit more data. And you can see there that hospitalizations by age, of course, are the greatest for those 50 and older, but there are still a few in that younger age group. There's one in the 0 to 9 and one in the 20 to 29 age group. 3 in 30 to 39 and 3 in 40 to 49. And then the numbers increase from there. So this is important for us to keep our eye on as well. And now we get to Grand Forks information. With our 879 tests completed and 11 are positive, household contact has been 5, confirmed travel has been 2, possible travel 2, close contact 1, and community spread 1. Next slide, please. Once again, our most effective strategies to contain this virus still remain that physical distancing, and then washing your hands, staying home if you're sick. We're just saying plain stay home as much as possible right now, but avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth, covering your cough, cleaning and disinfecting things. And then absolutely it goes without saying to avoid close contact with people who are sick. And because of our asymptomatic carriage and potential spread to others, we're really recommending avoiding close contact as much as possible. Next slide, please. And then this one, busy slide, I apologize, but it's something that we created for the public to better understand what to do if you've been in close contact with someone. And so it's got all the various scenarios that can happen there. This is also a very big part of our contact tracing. It mirrors that algorithm as well. And then it describes what self-quarantine is, what self-monitoring is, and practicing physical distancing. Before I move on to the next slide, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information that will be in our situation report. And that is that we have a total of 8 people that have recovered from COVID for the Grand Forks County cases. Now keep in mind our numbers are still pretty low and things could change. But we do have 23 people who have been released from the monitoring that we were doing. But keep in mind that everybody might have a varying number of contacts. So our staff are still monitoring a number of people. And then we did place 2 individuals in isolation in the last couple of, in quarantine in the last couple of days, who were homeless and couldn't safely quarantine in an environment that was congregate or not safe for some other reason. And then next slide is just once again our hotline information, the North Dakota Department of Health, and they have a variety of hotline information, hotlines that are available to long-term care and providers. Alltrue is the number we want you to call if you need to be tested, and Alltrue is your provider to call first before presenting at the clinic, and then the Grand Forks Public Health Department hotline. We also have on our website a place where people can email us with questions, and those are routed to our staff. And we are still asking people to take the travel survey if they have traveled. If they've traveled pretty much from any state now, we're recommending a 14-day self-quarantine. And then our last 2 slides are just those resources again. I can't stress enough how valuable that North Dakota Department of Health website is, because they're constantly changing the information that is available there in terms of how the data is reported. And it's highlighted during the governor's news conferences. We try to remind people that it's available. Today at our news conference that the mayor hosted, we hosted a couple of community agencies that are doing some really good work to help connect people with resources. And the focus was really on food, because we know that that's such an important thing that we provide to people in our community as they struggle with either staying home and not having the resources, or they're impacted financially by the situation. And we anticipate that we'll have more resources available, but the Public Information Center also has all that information on their website as well. And we just encourage people to reach out if they need anything at all. And next slide, some more resources. And then lastly, I would entertain any questions that the council members or you, Mr. Mayor, might have for me.
Excellent presentation. Any questions for Ms. Swanson? Mr. Weigel? Mute. Please, Mr. Weigel.
It says I'm still muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my computer's a little frozen. I think John and I were hitting the unmute button at the same time. Ms. Swanson, you said of the 11 cases we have in Grand Forks County, 8 of those people are recovered. Is that correct? Or did I misinterpret that?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sandy next.
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Swanson, I wouldn't say I'm as much of a numbers guy as the governor is, but I like to be a numbers guy. And I'm looking at one of the slides you provided, the largest group who've tested positive are the 30 to 39-year-olds,
Hmm.
well as the largest amount of community spread at 120, or is via community spread at 129 people. It seems to me that there would be a correlation between the largest numbers of cases at 71 in that 30 to 39-year-old group being probably the largest group in the 129 where it was community spread. Seeing what's going on in Burley and especially in Cass County, can one make the correlation that the 30 to 39-year-olds aren't following the rules and are spending too much time hanging out with one another? Or I know this, maybe this is a rhetorical question, but it seems to me that it's important for people in our community, when you're hearing from people on the radio, people in general, people that I visit with on the street that say we need to get back to business. And I understand and want to get back to business. I also recognize that, as the mayor has been pointing out over and over again, you know, the virus doesn't spread itself. People spread the virus. Do you believe that that largest amount of community spread has been brought on by people not heeding the warnings?
Mayor Brown, members of the council, Mr. Sandy, I think it would be premature to make that inference between those two data points. It's possible, it certainly is, but it's also possible that that's an age group that has potentially young children in their household, and those young children might be asymptomatic and providing a path for a positive test among a household member, but the children are not symptomatic and not being tested. So that's another theory that could be out there. I don't have the answer to that, but of course we want people to continue doing what they're doing to prevent the spread of disease. We don't really know if those two data points are related to one another at this point in time, but I can tell you that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has sent a team to North Dakota, and they're working between Bismarck and Fargo, and hopefully will come up with some answers for us to help us understand what's happening in our state. I also don't know the reason why Grand Forks has a low number of positive tests. We are testing at a rate that's similar to other areas, and yet it remains low. And if it's because we're doing what we are supposed to be doing, that would be a good thing.
It would be.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one follow-up comment. I do believe that the people of Grand Forks are generally smarter than the people all across the country and other areas of North Dakota. I think similar to the way the state is now providing data related to hospitalizations, I believe it would be important for people to understand the correlation between ages and community spread as well. I don't know when that data would be statistically significant so that it would warrant being publicized, but when it is, I think it'd be important for people to know, so that when the mayor continues to say people need to stay home, he would have solid data to back that up. Thank you, Ms. Swanson.
Thank you. Any further questions for Ms. Swanson? Excellent presentation, Deb. Thank you. Next, we go to item 3, action items. Action item 3.1.
Confirmation and extension of Mayor's COVID-19 emergency declaration.
Mr. Swanson.
Mayor Brown, members of the council, under your city code, the mayor has the authority to issue an emergency declaration or proclamation that is valid for a period of 30 days. In this particular case, the mayor issued a declaration of public health emergency on March 16th. That will expire this Wednesday on the 15th unless it's extended or confirmed by the city council. My understanding, although the numbers I have in my staff report now were put together last Thursday, so they're clearly understated, but I see no reason why this council would not extend and confirm the existence of the proclamation and declaration of a public health emergency. As drafted and presented to you, we have used a June 15th timeline. That was to match the current declaration of emergency that was out there for the flood. That date can obviously be changed to whatever date is appropriate. It can be extended by the council beyond the 15th of June. That just seemed to be an opportune time to consider what occurs over the next period of time. If there were circumstances that allowed you to revoke or rescind that proclamation earlier, the council has the authority to do so. If you do not adopt an action to extend the declaration, all of the decisions made by the mayor in the context of an emergency decision become void, null and void. So I can answer any questions you may have. I believe the resolution is appropriate before you, and I would leave it up to the mayor or council to take whatever action you deem appropriate. I am again available to respond to any questions you may have.
Okay,
I'll move
council,
to approve extension as recommended.
Mr. Weber motions, second.
Second.
Ms. Marshall,
Second.
discussion from council? Hearing,
So,
Ms. Sandy?
Swanson, can you go and review the declarations that have been made to this point?
The declarations made by Mayor Brown.
Yes.
We have two current declarations. One is a declaration relating to the flooding of the Red River. The second declaration was the one that was issued on March 16th relating to the public health COVID-19 emergency.
Very good. Thank you.
Any further discussion? If not, we have a motion second before us. Mr. Weigel.
Do we think June 15th is a little long? I just think of businesses that are out there that all they're going to see is the June 15th date. And granted, it could be June 15th, but it could also be May 15th as well. I'm just wondering if we take this take it by a 2-week increment versus a month-and-a-half increment.
My response to that is I have seen nothing from a public health perspective that would lead us to believe that the COVID-19 issue will be resolved in that period of time. My council can set whatever date you like. My concern would be that you don't allow the declaration to expire if you continue to wish to rely upon the authority that the mayor has exercised. I would also recount for you that the decisions that have been made to close businesses have not been made by the mayor, they have been made by the governor. Those orders would be independent of any orders, whether it's a declaration issued by this body or orders by the mayor. In fact, the orders, for the most part, that have been issued as emergency orders by Mayor Brown have been to authorize certain activities by businesses or the like. The exception to that is the mayor has closed, for example, the Greenway, some of the recreational areas adjacent to the Greenway. He's waived the fares on public transportation. He has allowed night bus to terminate or be suspended. He's allowed dial-a-ride. So I don't know that there's a relationship between the length of your declaration and the closing of businesses because it's not been acted upon by the city.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Any further discussion by council?
Mr. Mayor, if I
Weber.
may. When I made my motion, it was based on the understanding that council can rescind this and can change the due date or the extension or the termination date of the resolution.
That is correct. If the facts were such that council chose to rescind it earlier than June 15th, council alone has that authority. The mayor no longer has the authority to either extend or rescind that resolution or declaration of public health emergency. That lies exclusively now within the control of the council.
Thank you.
Mr. Sandy.
Mayor, thank you. I certainly don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I believe so far I have a lot of faith in the judgment that you've been exercising. You've been delivering a good message to the people of Grand Forks. I also believe that if and when the governor changes his stance, you will be taking a pragmatic stance on it as well, determining what is most important for the citizens of Grand Forks at that time based upon the certain circumstances. And so we as a council will have the opportunity, if we think that you are acting recklessly at that point, we would have the opportunity to rescind it. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that you're going to continue to use sound judgment
Good hope.
to think of the citizens of Grand Forks in the best light. Thank you, Mr. Wagner. I'm planning on approving this, this motion.
So we have a motion and a second before us. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 4, need a motion to adjourn. Mr. Weigel motions.
Do
Mr.
we-
Doc. Yes, Mr. Sandy,
Do we typically have time for council comments in a council
we
meeting?
do.
Not,
We
no.
do. Right,
Not in a special meeting.
not a special.
No,
Meeting.
because it's not on the agenda, you cannot act on that in a special meeting.
Very
Thank you.
good. We'll hold my personal comments to the end of the committee of the whole meeting.
Thank
Correct,
you.
that'd be appropriate.
We have a motion, a second to adjourn. Motion carries. Thank you. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Mr. Sandy, if you could please hold a minute for the committee of the whole while I move people around for your presentations, the committee of the whole. I will let you know when we're ready.
Break time, everyone. Take 5.
Okay, at this time, I believe I have everyone moved into the meeting. Mr. Sandy and the rest of the council, you may proceed.
Is everybody ready?
Good to go, Mr. Sandy, yes.
Very good. Thank you, John. Finding my agenda. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks to the city council for all being available tonight, and of course, all of city staff. This is Grand Forks City Council for the committee of the whole for Monday, April 13th. Under item 1, call to order, 1.1, welcome and roll call.
Weigel,
Here.
Dockler,
Here.
Weber,
Here.
Mock,
Here.
Marshall,
Here.
Sandy,
Here.
Bean.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. Under item 2, discussion items, item 2.1, 2020 CDBG funding update. Ms. Richards, is that going to be you tonight?
That's me. Thank you, Mr. Sandy.
Great.
As your updated staff report says, the city has been informed that we will be getting an extra $268,000 of CDBG funds through the CARES Act to deal with the COVID crisis. HUD has waived some of its notification requirements and just some of its requirements in general are being reviewed. We haven't got final guidance on that, but I did want to come to you with the news that we have this extra money and some of our preliminary thoughts on how to allocate it. Since we have just gone through a pretty comprehensive competitive application process, we're going to try to use that to the best of our ability. We did look at creating the community services grant program this year to supplement those CDBG operating funds. Since that funding would come from Fund 2163, which uses sales tax revenue, staff is kind of recommending using this extra CDBG to replace that and free up those potential sales tax revenues that might not be there this year. So then the balance of the CDBG CARES, which would be about 142,000, would then be allocated across those 2020 applicants. We've asked the applicants to use this as an opportunity to review their original funding requests, not in any means in an attempt to defund anybody, but just the opposite, with the recognition that COVID has changed pretty much everything in terms of funding and the needs that these agencies might be seeing from their clients. We've asked them to just basically update their request in light of COVID, and then we'll come back to council once we have some actual funding recommendations based on those revisions. As your staff report shows, we were scheduled to hold the public hearing on our 2020 program next Monday. I hope that we can still do that relatively quickly, but I did want to get your feedback on staff's approach to kind of using these funds in place of local funds in 2163, and then just in general, the allocation process that we're looking at, with the idea that as soon as we hear enough from HUD to feel comfortable with the process, we'll come back, hopefully early in May. And with that, I'd certainly stand for any questions.
Meredith, before we move on, can you give me a refresher on how the money is divided between brick and mortar and operational support? How do we determine the percentages or the dollars that go to each segment?
In a typical year, there is a HUD cap on public service or operating funds at 15%, but HUD has waived that for these CARES funds with the recognition that operating funds are what agencies need to deploy rapidly. While we could use some of these funds to build a hospital, for instance, we don't have that magnitude of funding, and really for our community, it seems to make sense to just use them for operating funds.
Great, thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, Ms. Marshall.
Yes, I like the idea, Ms. Richards, of utilizing the CDBG federal money rather than tapping into our tax funds and for the community service grants. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I look forward to the CDBG or the community committee looking at that and other options. Curious though, in the first round there were 14 agencies, I believe, that applied for public service grants. 10 were selected and 4 were not. Do those 4 have a chance to rewrite their applications, or would it just be the 10 that were in the second round?
We've asked all applicants to revise their applications with the exception of Santa Claus Girls, because they just really don't meet those CDBG requirements. They didn't receive funding in the first round anyway, and they're basically ineligible for CDBG funding. But the other applicants we've asked to basically resubmit with COVID response in mind.
Okay, great, thank you. With that, I understand that you're looking for just simply a motion to table the public hearing until a later date. I'd make that motion.
Mr.
Sandy, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Before I accept a second on that, I wanted to interject one thought or a question first. Meredith, do we have any idea what sort of CDBG funding we're going to get for 2021? I'm sure it's all up in the air right now.
Unless there's another tranche of funding through, some special stimulus type funding, we're assuming that it will be pretty comparable to this year's funding, which was, let me check to give you, 455,668 was our 2020 allocation.
I'm more than happy to table this. I'm just wondering what the council's appetite is on if there are any thoughts to changing direction with the CDBG funding. I'm all for it. And don't get me wrong, I think that the Community Advisory Committee is doing a good job, but I also believe that they take a lot of their direction from council as to what our intentions or what we believe the funding should be used for. I am, after visiting with Councilman Weber today, I'm concerned about housing for people and the long-term effects of what we're currently seeing in with people being laid off, and my concern about homelessness in our community. And so I'm not making a motion. I'm looking for others to provide input if they think that we should be directing the Community Advisory Committee to readjust, and perhaps we should be concentrating on brick and mortar for affordable housing. And so maybe I'll turn to you, Mr. Weber, to provide some insight.
Very good. Thank you, President Sandy. I understand that when we made decisions months ago, it was before everything had changed. And it's certain there's a logic to rethinking some of those decisions. However, even with the additional CDBG funding that's being allotted at this time, we are still well below levels that we were receiving just a few short years ago. I'm somewhat concerned. I am concerned about any possible precedent that we ignore the commitment we've made from the city to support human service needs in our community. CDBG funds, Ms. Richards, you've mentioned that a lot of the strings attached to those federal dollars have been loosened, but one of the advantages of the city money was we know our local situation better than the feds, and we were going to be able to be more nimble with those dollars. Help me to understand the current motion to table and the inclusion of possibly holding back on those $2163 to this effort. That's all something that will be brought back at some future date. Is that the intention? Or are we deciding tonight to not make that commitment that we'd agreed to previously?
Well, that's the direction I'm looking for. Given the pressure that we know will be on sales tax revenues, I guess perhaps I hastily made the assumption that that would be the direction, to reduce the demand on those sales tax dollars and use this federal funding to replace the money out of 2163. But if if you want to maintain that funding, then that's exactly true. We would have an extra $125,700 that would be available to go to our local agencies, assuming those sales tax revenues come in and we don't have to dip into reserves to do that.
Very good. These sales tax dollars go into various different pots. The majority of our old sales tax goes to property tax relief. The economic development funds are about 1/5 of 1% of what's collected, and those are designated specifically for economic development. Economic development for manufacturing and other forms of economic development are certainly important. We'll want to be making those investments in our future as quickly as possible, or as requests come along. Recognition that economic development includes those less fortunate in our community was an important principle behind these funds that I'm hesitant to simply give up on at this time. Again, if we're tabling this, is the motion, Ms. Marshall, to table it indefinitely or to come back in 2 weeks, in 30 days? Help me to understand better what our intent to table means.
Well, my understanding, and Ms. Richards, correct me if I'm wrong, is that what you put in the staff report is that the Community Advisory Committee would meet sometime between now and when this issue would be brought back to the Committee of the Whole or the City Council, with an opportunity for those members of that committee to hash through the various issues and options and make a recommendation, and then that would come back to the council. Is that correct, Ms. Richards?
Well, I was wanting some level of support for this approach that I had outlined, because if there is support for that, then we can proceed pretty rapidly. If you want to have the full 268,000 of new dollars be allocated versus taking that 2163 money off the top, perhaps that's too much money to spread around to those handful of applicants. So that's basically what I'm looking for this evening is if you want to use the federal funds to replace local funds, I've laid out a strategy for you. If you don't, then I need to develop a new strategy for how to use those $268,000.
So Todd, 1 second. I, for one, like the approach that you were going with, Meredith. I'd like to, personally would like to see us keep the $2163 so that we can, because we can use those strategically for this group later if we decide that that's most important. So I believe the approach that you're taking, Ms. Richards, is right on. What I was getting at is, if not today, if not concentrating on brick and mortars for housing today is important, because I agree with Mr. Weber. There are a lot of organizations that are counting on the dollars that we've essentially already told them is coming. So I don't want to take those dollars away from them today. But I think at some point we as a council need to have the discussion of what do we think is important for these dollars moving forward, and perhaps it's for next year. We need to have a good discussion about, and I know Ms. Richards, you always bring this to us. I'm not saying that you don't. Just saying we need to be thinking about these things long term. And I, for one, think that perhaps for next year we should be providing guidance that brick and mortar for housing might be important. Of course, that may change 3 months from now. I'm just throwing it out there today that I believe that this is going to be an important issue in our community. And since we've essentially left the Housing Authority out with their 2 big projects for affordable housing for this year, we may want to work with Mr. Hanson to, as Doug used to say, go in with a laser focus on those issues, on the housing issues. But I, for one, like Mrs. Marshall's motion, and I like the approach you've taken, Ms. Richard. Yes, Mr. Weigel.
I do have one question. The Phoenix Playground, is that for, who owns that, or who will maintain that after this funding comes through? And who will make up the additional funding that they're short?
That project is, as I recall, we fully funded phase 1 of the project. And then, excuse me, they were planning on doing fundraising for the balance through the school's foundation. It will be owned by the school. I think there's some cooperative arrangement with the park district, but it will be on school property and owned by the schools.
And when it says inclusive, what does that mean? Is it for children that have different handicaps, or?
I believe so. I don't think it's as fully accessible as the Alley's playground by Sertoma Park, but that's the idea, is to make it more accessible.
Okay. I know one concern that I do have is taking money from one tax base or one taxing entity and giving it to another taxing entity. To me, it's almost like that entity is double dipping in what they're getting. So I do have a little bit of a concern with that. But as Mr. Sandy talks about affordable housing, we're for Northland's rescue mission, their heating system upgrade, we're contributing $33,000 of the $99,000 requested, which to me, that'd almost be a higher priority to make sure that the homeless people in our community do have a place to go in a properly heated place. So I'm looking forward to more conversations regarding priorities moving forward.
Sure. If I could just interject, we do have a listening session. Council members Mock and Doppler are going to be moderating a listening session devoted to housing insecurity tomorrow. We've invited the appropriate agencies to be part of that. Oh, excuse me, not tomorrow, on Wednesday. And then also just as a reminder, when we do sell the corporate center, which is somewhat questionable, but we expect to be happening either later this year or early next year, that will generate a very large sum of program income for the CDBG program. And so at that point, some pretty substantial bricks and mortar projects will be possible. So just as you think about prioritizing, know that we have this kind of last windfall of flood money coming through the system in the relatively short term. So that is an opportunity to really make some significant impacts on whatever project council prioritizes at that time.
Very good. So any other comments? Yes, Ms. Marshall?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify when we spoke about substituting the federal money for the state cities tax dollar funds this year. That's just a short. That's just now. We're not talking about defunding this service dollar or the community service grants in any way, shape, or form going into the future, and that. If we're talking that would be of great concern to me, but that's not the case here.
No, I'm looking at this as for 2020 only. And then in each budget cycle, that's up to city council to either include it or exclude it. But yeah, it's my intention to just look at this year's funding.
Any other comments? Mr. Phelan, you had your hand up earlier. I'm sorry, I ignored you.
Hey, Council President Sandy, thank you. I was just making sure, I think we're going to have a hard enough time to make our 2020 budget. And so I think, 50% of the current 1% sales tax goes to property tax relief. We're likely not going to touch that at this point in time. So the other 50% really goes to economic development and infrastructure. That's where we're going to focus on holding back on some of the expenditures. So this $125,000 as part of the economic development portion is a big deal. And so I just wanted to encourage you guys to do that. And as Ms. Marshall said, it is a policy priority. We know that, and we'll have to wrestle with that in the 21 budget too.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Any other comments? There is a motion to table on the floor. Is there a second? Second by Weigel. No other comments. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Same sign. Motion carries unanimously. It's tabled. Ms. Richards, did you want that tabled indefinitely, or was there a timeline you wanted on that?
Well, I think indefinitely, but with the idea that it will not be too terribly long.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Item 2.2, ordinance for small cell wireless facilities and wireless support structures in the public right-of-way. Mr. Karenko, good evening.
Good evening, Council President Sandy and members of the committee. What you have before you is the preliminary ordinance regarding small cell wireless facilities within the city's right-of-way. This is a follow-up to the informational item, which was presented at the February 10th Committee of the Whole meeting. In general, this ordinance is not specific to any particular carrier, nor is it applicable to private property. This ordinance is one of our first steps for small cell facilities here in Grand Forks. And in the near future, we're anticipating that there will be a draft small cell agreement, likely at the next Committee of the Whole meeting. Verizon staff have been in contact with us regarding the small cell facilities in Grand Forks, and they have provided some input on the draft ordinance before you. And I believe we do have them on the phone. I believe we have Tammy Hartman and Amy Brandt of Verizon. These comments that they've provided have been forwarded on to the city attorney for consideration. Staff is recommending preliminary approval pending city attorney's final revisions. And I suppose before I ask John to unmute Tammy and Amy, Howard, would you like to add anything additional to this item?
Mr. Swanson, anything?
Thank you, Mr. Sandy. I don't have much to add to what Dave has told you. It was a long-term project to arrive at this draft. We are evaluating comments we've received from Verizon. I am working on incorporating some of their comments into a revised draft. There are also some items that are incomplete in this draft, for example, the numbering system and internal references. But I think the overall content of the draft ordinance is appropriate to give preliminary approval, it would come back to council at a future date for final adoption, and we would expect that there will be further amendments to the ordinance at that time. The other piece of information I think you should know is this particular document only governs that right-of-way which is in the control of the city of Grand Forks. It does not affect right-of-way that any other governments may have control over.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Any questions or comments for Mr. Kranko? Yes, Ms. Weigel, Mr. Weigel?
I'll move approval.
Mr. Weigel moves approval. Is there a second? Second by Dockler. Any other comments? Mr. Kranko, did you have something you wanted to add?
Just wanted to verify the staff that we have from Verizon on the phone, if they had any comments or if you had any questions for them as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the Verizon folks, or do they have any comments they want to add?
I am going to try to speak. Okay, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Hang on for 1 second.
Good evening, Ms. Hartman.
Good evening. It's Tammy Hartman, and I am the Network Outreach Manager for Verizon Wireless. And I've been working with David and Al and your other staff members for several months to come up with this ordinance that's in front of you today. They've been great partners. We have great, robust conversations. And Verizon's excited and ready to expand our network and get coverage that is getting better speed to your members of your community. I'm open for any questions. I'm sorry I can't be there. And hopefully next time something comes in front of the council, I'm able to attend in person.
Yeah, Ms. Hartman, it's like you're here with us, so thank you for coming.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
And are there any comments or questions for Ms. Hartman?
Oh, but Mr. Sandy, can I ask a question?
Yes, Ms. Mock.
I guess this is probably more for our engineering staff, but with the different stealth capabilities, are we requiring city-owned structures to be a certain design, or are we just allowing for those stealth designs within the ordinance?
Ms. Mock, I believe the ordinance identifies that the antennas would be enclosed in a shroud.
Okay, so are we going to, I guess there are different designs and the different designs evolve where you can do more of like the trees or attaching to a light pole or different ways to kind of blend those structures. Are we going to just adapt as the technology adapts?
I believe at this point in time, the ordinance is more general.
Okay.
In general terms. We'll end up looking at those probably when we get to the individual agreements themselves, as well as what is proposed by the individual carriers as they come forward.
Okay. And
Mr.
with
Sandy?
the city-owned?
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say with this agreement, are we going to be able to get more of them onto city-owned as opposed to the private, or will we continue to have a good mix of both private and public structures through the city?
Overall, this item is just for the ordinance right now. We're likely going to be bringing the agreement with the draft master agreement forward at another time. So the ordinance doesn't cover those details. However, it is likely that an agreement, which would come forward at a later date, might get into that a little bit more in detail. As for the number of public versus private poles, any of the poles that we are kind of looking at within city right of way, we're hoping that those are going to end up on our streetlight poles, and that those streetlight poles will be removed and replaced with a more robust structure that will be able to be structurally capable of handling the loads of the antenna and the equipment.
Good. Mr. Sandy, could I address that?
Yes, Mr. Swanson.
Thank you. As to the question about the aesthetic requirements imposed by the ordinance, much of the city's authority on that has been removed by FCC order. So we have some parameters that we can work within, but largely the ability to direct the aesthetic look has been removed. As to the co-locating requirement, the ordinance is premised on a preference for co-locating on public facilities. It, however, does not allow the locating of these antennas on, for example, your signal light poles or traffic control devices. Other than that, the carrier is free to come in and propose their own locations. That is not governed if it's on private property. It would be governed on public right-of-way. And in those instances, under both the draft agreement, which is not before you today, but the draft ordinance as well, encourage the co-locating of facilities, whether it's multiple carriers or multiple uses on a publicly owned pole or facility.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Mr. Weber.
I'm excited about getting a faster internet speed. I think this is going to be beneficial to our community economically. We're interested in developing a smart campus, tech campus here in the city. I intend to facilitate those efforts moving forward. At the same time, even if we were opposed to this, and there are health concerns, including published articles and in respected journals, perhaps Ms. Hartman would want to discuss this, but even if we had those concerns, my understanding from Mr. Swanson and others is that we have very little leeway in voting for or against this. We're basically being given something and we need to approve it. So I plan on voting in favor of the motion. I don't think we have much choice. But if Ms. Hartman would wish to speak to the health concerns, that would be of interest.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to address that. I will tell you that Verizon operates our equipment well below the FCC guidelines. And you are correct, regulation of that equipment and small cell is handled exclusively by the FCC in connection with the licenses issued by them to us to operate our equipment in a frequency spectrum that we purchased from the FCC. So our equipment is operating well below the FCC guidelines, Mr. Weber. And after we deploy our equipment in your city, we do give you a letter. My colleague Amy Brandt is on the line as well with us. She's a project manager and maybe can speak to the letter that we do issue telling you this is what the emissions that come from our equipment that's installed on that pole are. And then over time, as we maybe change out equipment, we're happy to give more updates on that emission information. But again, just to assure you that it's important to us to operate our equipment well below the guidelines that the FCC requires of us. So we want to be a good member of your community and in your city.
Thank you, Ms. Hartman.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, there's a motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 2.3, revised engineering report for project 8211, District 578, Stormwater Pond for Edgewood Villas Second Re-subdivision. Mr. Grasser or
Yep.
Mr. Lieberman? Yes, Mr. Grasser.
Thank you, Council Member, President Sandy, Member City Council. This one, I've got to give a little bit of background on it. If you remember, this goes back to the project. If you recall, Mr. Giese and Mr. Miscavige proposed developing that area essentially from 40th Avenue South down to 47th Avenue South. It's westerly of the South End Rainway. And if you remember, some of the concepts there was kind of an aging in place concept where they had, more independent housing, independent living units, and then progressively more where you needed additional assistance. The first phase of that was really that congregate housing concept with just planning and zoning activities between 44th Avenue and 47th. If you jump into the staff report, near the end, we actually have a drawing that will give you kind of the physical footprint of what I'm talking about. So in the beginning, the concept here was that the developers were going to have a private pond on the south side of 44th Avenue South. But to cover some of the public infrastructure right-of-ways, things like that, that was going to be coupled with a public pond. They were originally going to construct that with private funds. The concept then to the north was a future to be determined pond to be located by whoever was going to develop that area, again, at some unknown time in the future. The good news is that unknown time in the future really got accelerated basically now to 2020. The original engineer's report for that pond was to construct the pond and special assess it against the benefiting areas. The developers, what kind of transpired then is that original on the south side, that public-private pond concept essentially has morphed into pretty much all being a public pond. They have some flexibility on the private side to do some things with that pond aesthetically and whatnot, but that concept has changed to be a public pond. Concurrent with that, the developers to the north have brought that pond to serve that area down into that same corner, essentially as the other ponds. You can see that on the drawing. They're located right next to each other. They effectively are now working as one pond hydraulically. So the developers then asked us, they said, hey, we understand there's a city share for some ponds, and the city share gets progressively higher if you're serving a larger area. So they asked us to go back and look at this as if it were essentially one public pond. We did that. And when we did that, we do see that they just barely, they passed the threshold of the city. Instead of being now a 10% share, would be 15%. And if you remember, the original concept with the city share was to go with encourage larger ponds so we had less maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. So they have now moved into that threshold of 15%. In addition, there's some components of I'll just call it the plumbing that now are common to those features, and they asked us that those features now also be included in the special assessment district for that pond. So long story short, the end result is that the city share has gone up to 15%, and the cost estimate has gone up because it's including some larger components. These all seem to be desired and somewhat necessary even for these projects to move forward in the light of the COVID and everything else that's going on. So we are asking then to revise the engineer's report as presented. Any questions on that confusing array?
Thank you, Mr. Grasser. Are there any questions? Mr. Veen, do you have a question?
I do not. I was just going to move approval.
Mr. Veen moves approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Marshall. I have a very quick question, Al.
Yes, sir.
The ponds themselves are not actually physically attached into one pond, but they are acting as one pond because of piping between the two of them?
Correct. About the only thing that's separating them is the roadway itself, but the pipes underneath connect them, and so they essentially operate as if they were one unit. So they're about 50 feet apart at the top.
I'm a big supporter of this. I think it's great. I think it'll actually look pretty nice in that neighborhood. I wonder how far apart can you connect ponds and consider them the same pond?
from an engineering standpoint, they can be considerably separated. What happens though is generally the farther apart you get, the bigger the pipes you're going to need to make them interconnect. And so it becomes financially, not viable for those to be separated very much. And that's why way back in the beginning, this pond on the north side was going to be probably way up by the south end drainway on the north end of the property.
Right.
But again, they figured out economically it was much more effective to bring it down to the south end and then interconnect them and again, make them function as one.
Great. Any other questions? There's a motion and a second. Seeing no
Clever,
questions. Yeah, it's clever. It's good. Smart. It's good thinking. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here's a good one. Item 2.4, plans and specs for projects numbers 8209, 10, 11, and 12, district numbers 349, 577, 578, and 750. Water main storm sewer for South 19th Street from 40th to 44th Avenue South, stormwater pond for Edgewood second re-subdivision, paving for South 19th Street from 40th to 44th Avenue South. Is that one you, Mr. Lieberman?
Yes, it is. Thank you, President Sandy, members of the committee. This project is a continuation of our discussion on Edgewood second re-subdivision. This project, at the request of Muskogee Properties, will install storm sewer, water, stormwater pond, and paving in the Edgewood second re-subdivision neighborhood, adjacent to the pond that Mr. Grasser just referred to. This project was last brought to the council on March 16th, where the city council approved a task order for design of this by CPS. The council also approved created the special assessment districts and directed engineering to develop plans and specifications for this project. Since that time, the assessment commission has met and assigned benefits, and CPS has provided the engineering department a set of designs, which we have reviewed once. And just today we received the 95% submittal, which we're in the process of reviewing. So this project is moving nicely down the path, and we are currently recommending that the committee approve plans and specifications for this.
Great, thank you, Mr. Lieberman. Are there any comments or questions?
I'll move approval.
Moves approval. Is there a second? Mr.
Second.
Seconds. Any other comments? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you for that. Opposed, same
Thank
sign.
you.
Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Lieberman. Very good information tonight. Item 2.5, plans and specifications for project number 8213, paving South 17th Street from 44th to 47th Avenue South. Mr. Lieberman again?
Yes, thank you, President Sandy. This continues our theme of Edgewood Village discussions. This project is along South 17th Street in Edgewood Village First Re-subdivision. This is a privately funded project, which is why it has not met the city council previously. It's 100% privately funded. The developer's consultant has provided engineering a design that we have reviewed, and we have found the plans and specifications to be adequate. And we are bringing this to the committee and next week to the council because this project takes place in public right-of-way. So at this point, we are recommending the committee approve plans and specifications for this project.
Great. Mr. Veen?
Move approval.
Veen moves approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Marshall. Any other comments? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Lieberman. Appreciate that again. Item 2.6, reimbursement rates for city engineering services. I assume this will be your discussion as well, Mr. Lieberman?
Correct. Thank you, President Sandy. This project is some work I've been working on for a few months now, and for tonight's purposes, it's primarily an administrative update to the agreement form that engineering department uses when we perform services, engineering services for private developers. We routinely enter these type of agreements about 4 to 6 per year. We actually have 2 different types of these agreements. We refer to the forms as a 2-way agreement or a 3-way agreement. 2-way is simply between the city and the developer, in which case the developer is paying for a project 100% private funds, and the engineering department is performing all aspects of engineering services from design to project management, surveying, construction management, etc. The other form is a 3-way agreement, and that introduces a private consultant into the agreement. And again, this is privately funded work by the developer, and the level of involvement by the engineering department varies, but typically the consultant would do a design and may inspect the project, and the engineering department would manage oversight of that project. Just for comparison purposes, our current agreement forms, we've been using these for a number of years, and they use a multiplier rate schedule for computing what the reimbursement is to the city for the services that we provide. This schedule requires pretty detailed tracking of all of our direct hours, our vehicle mileage, any direct expenses. Honestly, it's a very administratively burdensome process. So part of our bringing this forward tonight is to propose a new process in our agreement form whereby we get a little bit more efficient and reduce that administrative burden to the city. So in looking at different processes, back in January, I spoke with 3 other engineering staffs at Fargo, Minot, and Bismarck to get an idea of how they do business, the different methods that are being used by engineering departments. And I found there's a variety of different methods, but it seemed that it would be very beneficial for Grand Forks if we adopted a percentage-based system rather than the multiplier-based system that we're currently using. That percentage-based system essentially computes the agreed reimbursement to the city based on a percentage of the construction cost versus the tracking of every single expense throughout a project. This percentage-based system is consistent with industry standards. It's how architect and engineering firms typically would quote for a project. It's in fact how the city of Fargo enters their agreements, and I kind of feel like they're at the forefront of this issue. This percentage-based system would allow or would account for variations in project size and complexity. So there's a high degree of fairness. You know, small projects that are very simple would not be charged as much as more expensive, larger, more expensive, complex projects. So there's a degree of fairness in how it's applied. And it's also tailorable based on what level of participation city engineering has in a project. For example, if we do not design a project, we obviously would not get reimbursed for that work. So tonight in this staff report, you'll find 2 proposed agreement forms that incorporate this percentage-based proposal. And it breaks down engineering participation into basically 4 different categories, which is oversight of a project, design of a project, construction management, and surveying. So a developer could reimburse the city for costs for as little as 1% to 3% of a project, construction costs, or if we provide every aspect of engineering service, the developer could agree to reimburse 8%, up to 8% in a two-way agreement scenario. So with that, I'll open the floor to any discussion or questions, as I imagine there may be some.
Mr. Weigel, question?
I've got a couple quick questions for you, Mr. Lieberman. If I had $20 million and I wanted to build something, do I have to use the city's engineering, or can I hire Mr. Phelan's company to do it?
You absolutely could hire Mr. Phelan's company. There would be that in essence is the difference between a two-way agreement or a three-way. If you chose to use your own consulting firm, they could do the design, they can do the inspection of it, the surveying, and the city's participation would be limited just to oversight, which is in our best interest since they're constructing in a right-of-way, public right-of-way.
So and maybe this is a two-part question, is how much money have we taken in over the last year when it comes to collecting fees for engineering that we've done? And how much have we paid out to consultants to do engineering for the city because of the fact that our engineers are too busy? I think we've talked or had this discussion multiple times that our city engineers are stretched thin. They're doing the best they can, but it's tough to get some of them. So my question is should we even be doing this at all if we're pumping more money out to do projects for, as consulting for private developers versus keeping our city engineers in-house and just having them work on things that they need to work on in general, instead of trying to ship or allowing other people to hire us when we don't have the staff to currently do it? Are we putting out more money, or are we taking in more money from this?
That's a good question, Mr. Weigel. I think I heard about 5 or 6 different questions there. So if I miss one, please, I apologize. We collect in these 2- and 3-way agreements anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 per year from developers. That's on the high end. In slower years, it's $10,000 to $20,000 a year. Now, how much we pay for consulting work on public projects is really a different scenario. But when it comes to private work, we do have the ability to Edgewood first re-subdivision is a good example where second re-subdivision is an example where we enter a agreement and we can specify that our engineers are too busy and our workload just doesn't accommodate in-house design. So we will enter a 3-way agreement and allow the developer to go to their consultant of choice, which helps us to alleviate that burden. I don't know if that helped answer one or two of your questions.
Essentially, I think what you're saying is that we don't get enough from the city side for it to be a burden on you guys. If it was to be a burden, you tell them this is too much, you need to go somewhere else type thing. Is that essentially where this is going?
That's correct. We have a pressure relief valve, so to speak, in the 2-way versus the 3-way agreement. If we have the capacity in a slower year, we could enter a 2-way agreement and we could do all aspects of engineering services for a given project.
Sounds good. And that was just my concern. I don't want us to see us taking in $20,000. Meanwhile, on the back end, we're bleeding out $40,000. It wouldn't make sense to me, obviously, but I'm sure you guys have thought about that.
Mr. Weigel, thank you. That was a good question. I think all of us have been concerned about our engineering department and not only the workload, but the numbers of employees, engineers that we have, and our desire to have more engineers. I'm hoping, Mr. Lieberman, that the purpose behind this is to bring the fees that we charge to be more competitive. I'll say competitive, more in line with what people are paying other engineering firms for similar work, and not necessarily to discourage them from using our services, but to make sure that we aren't providing a competitive advantage for consumers that want to get cheap engineering, and therefore they're looking to the city to provide that.
That is correct, Mr. Sandy. We have noticed in engineering over the years that the multiplier that we have been using and multipliers that are common in the architect engineer firms, there's been a growing disparity between the two. And when I looked at several years of data, it's the burdensome nature of our current process. It's a challenge to track every little expense. For example, if a staff member has a 15-minute phone call, do they account for that and bill the developer accordingly? Or if we have a meeting for an hour with 6 or 7 people to discuss a project, do we keep track of each person's hour and their pay rates and apply a multiplier? It's very burdensome. So this simplifies our process, makes it more efficient by applying a percentage to agreeing to a percentage up front. And that percentage ensures that the city gets a reasonable reimbursement. It doesn't rely on the ability to track every direct or indirect expense.
Sure. Thank you for that explanation, Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Grasser, something to add?
Yes, I just wanted to maybe clarify any confusion. Under the two-way and the three-way agreement, either one of those, the developer is paying all of the bill. So there's no cost to the city per se. We're just getting reimbursed for our time under two different relationships. One where we're the engineer, the other is where we're just kind of the overall administrator. This is different than when we go and hire a consultant to do a different project. That's another process that we use, but it's not part of the two and three-way agreement. So I just wanted to be clear, the two and three-way agreement don't result in any expenditures on the city side. It's basically how we receive income for the services we provide under that scenario.
Right, other than our people expense, right?
Right.
Mr. Weigel, you had something to add?
I was just going to say, I understand that, Mr. Grasser. My concern was if we're bringing in $20,000 in income for a project that we're doing the consulting for, but yet we're hiring a consultant on the backside to do a project at the same time we're taking one in and we're paying $40,000, it wouldn't make financial sense. That was what my question is regarding.
Good point.
Very good.
Question.
Mr. Veen, question?
Question. Yeah, I have to say I support this. It makes a lot of sense just to go to a straight percentage. My only question is your percentage high enough? It's at 8% to do all of that. That seems like a pretty good deal.
In comparison, the city of Fargo uses 10% as their basis versus the 8% that we're proposing. I gave this considerable thought, and I landed on the fact that our current special assessment process accounts for 8% for engineering services. When we look at what finance adds on to a specially assessed process, we've already for years have been using that 8% as an acceptable rate. So I figured it's probably best to stay consistent with that.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of understandable, but in and of itself, for that level of service, and of course it's probably variable because that doesn't make any difference. I mean, that percentage is the same for a small project versus a large project, and a small project would actually be typically a higher percentage than a large project where you're doing this kind of as one percentage across the board. But I do think and I know in the past we tried to do is look at how we could hold the costs down for the developers and the people that were out there. But the reality seems is that burden comes back because it's still a low percentage compared to maybe even what our costs are.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that developers will still find that we are slightly less expensive than consultants. Simply because we're not in the profit business, and I've tried to account for that as well. I'm not trying to compete with consultants, but I think The data shows that over the years, we have not successfully recouped our costs from the city perspective. And this, I feel 8% brings us more in line with what would be appropriate for that. I mean, I think we could probably discuss whether 6% or 10% is the right number, but I think 8% is a precedent that we've already established, and that's why I'd recommend that.
Mr. Lieberman, that also makes sense to me. But to the contrary to that, if we're not trying to compete with other engineering firms, shouldn't our fee be higher? Same with on the special assessment side. So ultimately, I like what you've come up with. We have to start somewhere. I think we should be analyzing the data from once we implement this and try to determine if we've hit the right spot. Because still, if everyone comes to us for engineering services, we're obviously not charging enough. So I think as what our engineering department always does, analyze and evaluate, I think this is a great play. I'm a firm supporter of all the work that you put in. I think we should support this, and then we should continue to analyze and evaluate, and next year or the year after determine if it needs to change.
I think that's a very good strategy moving forward. If 10% makes more sense, we obviously could propose that and update this with City Council's approval. Absolutely.
Very good. Any other questions or thoughts for Mr. Lieberman or Mr. Grasser? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, we have 3 motions and no seconds. I'll go with Mr. Veen motions and Mr. Weber seconds. Any other comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Mr. Lieberman, thank you for all you've done on that. That's a lot of heavy lifting. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your addition to our team, by the way.
Thank you.
There is no council comments on the agenda, but I am going to open it up for council comments under the agenda. If there's anyone that's interested, I'll start with you, Mr. Weigel, if you have any thoughts or things that you want addressed.
Not that I can think of at this time. Just thanking all the healthcare workers for everything that they're doing. So
yes, I agree. Ms. Dockler.
Just that we are having that listening session on housing insecurity on Wednesday, and it will really be focused on kind of the people that are struggling and how if people aren't in their homes, how are they going to be able to social distance? And homes can look like a lot of different things, and so we also need to address that moving forward, I think, as a city. And so that's really what we're going to be looking at. How can we support community members right now who are at most risk?
Very good. Thank you. And thank you to Ms. Mock for co-hosting that. It's very important work. Mr. Weber?
Thank you, Mr. Sandy, President Sandy. In many ways, it's nice that we got to have a somewhat normal committee of the whole tonight. It's good to know that the city's business proceeds and we're looking to the future. Of course, we're all also thinking all the time about the current COVID crisis. As a city, our first priority must always be providing for the public safety, both in terms of today and anticipated concerns in the future. So far, we've been fortunate, and this has been the strength of public health, All Trues actions. We have some high testing rates in our community with fantastic turnaround times on those tests. And we have to include our citizens as well with following voluntary distancing. Of course, we must also always be thinking about the future. Right now, we're still waiting for what might possibly be the worst of COVID for our community, and then for the dust to settle. And while we deal with the current crisis and prepare for our recovery, the city is constantly monitoring the federal and state responses and the resources we anticipate that will be coming our way to local businesses, to individual taxpayers, to local lenders, and to municipal government. So with the mayor's leadership, we're already doing the work behind the scenes of developing recovery plans that will include, first of all, we need to take inventory of needs and anticipated resources. And then after we understand what the feds and state are planning on doing, we have to identify gaps and possible ways to address those at the local level, and then take steps to implement recovery in as strategic and efficient a manner as possible, and with all possible dispatch, of course, while always keeping in mind the need for public safety. Thank you, President Sandy.
That was really good off the top of your head, but very impressive. Ms. Mock, do you have any comments?
Just again, we'll have that listening session. I don't know. I think as Mr. Weber said, there's a lot that we don't know right now. So we can start by listening and learning from people who serve various folks in our community. And then as we prepare for the future, we'll just have to be flexible and continue listening to whatever needs come forward. I think we're all committed to that. I don't know if we really know exactly what those needs are, but I do think with some of the economic situations, we're going to have people that feel these effects for not only months, but probably years into the future. So we will have to adapt to that both as a city and as taxpayers, and just be flexible and figure out the best path forward.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Mock. Ms. Marshall?
Oh, I echo a lot of things that have been said. Some good thoughts. I want to, recognize Mr. Phelan and the city staff for continuing to do such a great job of leadership as we wend our way through all the complexities of the processes we're going and all the unknowns. Certainly glad that we're not faced with major flood issues at the same time. Nice to be able to put that one behind us, or at least know that we're moving on and we're not dealing with major damage in our community as a result of that. And I totally agree that there is a lot that's going to unfold over the months and years ahead of us in terms of the impact of the COVID virus, and we don't even know the beginning of what that is yet. I do want to add that in our discussion about housing, certainly support for people is right up there with having adequate housing and affordable housing, also having support for people to be able to take advantage of those housing opportunities to the max and to be able to continue to live as independently as possible is so very important. And so many people are working behind the scenes in our community, doing that every day now. Their jobs are essential. They're working 24/7, and a shout out to those folks.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Good words. Yes, Mr. Veen.
One quick question on the listening session coming up on Wednesday. What time is that, and how can people listen in on that?
Ms. Dockler or Ms. Mock?
It's on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, and it'll be on Zoom, a similar delivery to all the other listening sessions that were done previously.
Great.
I believe it's already listed on the website too.
So, okay, I just wanted to, that's nothing else to add.
Nothing else? Nothing else to add. Mr. Phelan, did you have any comments that you wanted to add from the city administrator point of view?
No, we really appreciate all your support from the city council, and we've made a lot of decisions, and having your support behind the scenes has been incredibly important. And so we really appreciate all of that. And I know there's some hard weeks and months to go regarding, some of the, not only the COVID public health impacts, but also the economic, and we'll really have to engage with you as city council members and policymakers on how to work through both of those issues. So we look forward to that. And we're so thankful, as the mayor always says, we have such a terrific city council. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Phelan, I know I learned today that the mayor has tasked or asked Ms. Richards to start working on a recovery plan. I know that several of us are concerned that if the governor decides tomorrow that he's going to remove some of the restrictions on businesses, that we locally want to make sure that we're prepared for that. So we're glad that Ms. Richards is starting to assemble that sort of a plan. I think, me personally, I think I'll speak for others on the council, are interested in knowing more about what that plan looks like, what her strategy is for putting that together, and kind of what kind of a timeline that will be ready. I don't, that's more of a rhetorical comment than it is a question. So know that that's on our minds because, excuse me, excuse me, I feel fine, no problem. I think that there are people in our community, there are small businesses in our community that are interested in getting back to work. And so being able to provide direction and to let those businesses know that we're thinking about it and working on a plan so that if and when the governor says, you know, the local municipalities need to make those decisions, that we're ready and aren't starting from zero at that point. We want to have something ready to go. So, of course, the mayor will ultimately be the leader trying to implement timelines, but we need to have timelines to work from. So I think it's important that we have that plan. And I think all of us would be interested in engaging on that if she's looking for input from the people on the council.
And Council President Sandy, you know, the mayor, we've discussed with community development because we want them to be our business development arm of the city of Grand Forks. So this is, as the mayor always says to people that he throws the ball to, this is a real terrific opportunity for them to succeed and do some great things. So we did have some briefings last week, and the Bank of North Dakota really advised us, let's take a wait and see approach on, we'll call it on the business recovery aspect, because every time, even at the state level, they've created a program, suddenly there's a federal program that's much better than what they were about ready to create. So they said, hold tight, let's have ongoing meet and greets on that as we move forward. So we're doing that, but I totally agree. And a lot of the policies that we'll have to move forward with, well, it needs city council approval. So we want to make sure you guys are engaged from the start. And so it's Meredith's got and her team have the ball, but it's really an hour strategy, I would say. I think the other thing we should probably keep track of is that we have some really great entrepreneurs that through some of the mayor's emergency orders have been allowed to do some things that they weren't able to do before. And I suspect when we come out of this, they'll have created some business opportunities that they'll have a hard time letting go of. So I suspect not only will we be discussing, you know, business plans moving forward, we'll also be discussing plans of people that have adapted and will want to continue to maintain their adaptation. And I only say this because, you know, I've read several national articles that are saying the same thing. We've deregulated some things. We've made some things, you know, because we had to. And I think that there might be a different mindset coming out of that from a business perspective. And I want you to be mindful of that too. And so we're pondering that too, Council President Sandy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phelan. I also think that goes with government. When we're talking about spending millions of dollars remodeling buildings, when half of our people seemingly are working from home and doing just fine, I think we need to strategize and make sure that we're putting our resources in the right place. And that's of course a rhetorical as well, Mr. Phelan.
Yeah, I ask that question all the time because, you know, I'm here more than others. And I think it's going to be a real, coming out of this is going to be a whole new way of conducting business, you know, just probably like the Great Recession was. And I think what I've gotten feedback from city staff is there's really still a need to come together as a team to work together. But, you know, the Zoom conferences and working from home is a positive too. So I think we're going to be much more well balanced. And, you know, partly thankfully, Council President Sandy, we didn't go ahead with some of the concepts we have because coming out of this, we're probably going to have even different and better concepts, knowing what the world's going to look like. So
I would agree. Two other thoughts. At some point, I'd like our what am I trying to call it? Mr. Veen and Mr. Weber's committee, not the Team Grand Forks, but the legislative committee. Thank you. I think we should engage with the legislative committee and even have a short meeting just to discuss what I believe will be a very important committee for our community moving forward, and how that committee should be thinking about what we should be engaging with our local legislators and Team Grand Forks, so that not only when we have the recovery plan and we can start implementing some of Meredith's ideas, we're also ready to start attacking on the legislative side. So probably sooner than later, and even hosting a meeting with our CODEL, not our federal CODEL, our local legislators, so that they can just to engage with them, let them know what we're thinking about, see if we can find out what they're hearing at the state level, so that we can be ready to respond. And my last thought is the governor's been touting the Care-19 app for tracking you personally, socially. I think we should say here that if people are interested in opting into that app, it's good so that if someone you've come across at the grocery store tests positive, they'll be able to track you. It is an opt-in app, so if you're not interested in it, you don't have to do it. But it's supposedly the concept is where they can help find you and identify that you might be a carrier, even though you are trying to do all the right things. So I would suggest here, I'm simply trying to get it out for people that the Care-19 app presumably works. And I would also suggest that the mayor, when he's talking to people, he should be touting that app as well, following the governor's leadership on that. Anyone else, anything else for the good of the order? Thank you all. Is there a motion to adjourn? Weigel, second Dockler. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Thank you, everyone. Good meeting. I appreciate it.
In this time of uncertainty,
one thing stands firm.
We've overcome adversity before,
and we will do it again.
But to come out of this bigger,
stronger,
we need your help.
good citizens, we ask you to stay home.
Don't endanger your extended family,
your friends,
your neighbors.
Stay home.
Stay safe.